You're listening to the Rosenfeld Review. I'm Lou Rosenfeld, and I am very happy to have my guest today, Luke Roberts, join us. Luke Roberts, based in London, COO and co-founder of HighFive, author of Leading Schools and Sustaining Innovation, which is about a year old or so, Luke?
It is indeed, Lou.
Excellent. And a panelist at a new conference that my company happens to be putting on December 3rd and 4th virtually, Advancing Service Design. We're so excited to be bringing more attention to and thinking on the subject of service design, and to have you as part of that conversation, Luke. Great to have you on the show.
Thank you very much.
So, Luke, you in our intros before the podcast started had a very interesting way of describing yourself. I said, what do you do in a nutshell? And if I got it right, you said you are a provoker of systems, or a poker of systems, or a pisser offer of systems. What? Talk about that.
I think we'll go with system provocateur, Lou.
Provocateur. Okay.
Yeah,
That just
well.
raised your consulting rate, at least twofold, having the EUR at the end of the word. That's very good. Very good. Good. Put that in the book, the big book of consulting tips. But go on.
Well, I think what I'm really interested in is not just change, but how do you change systems? And often systems get into rituals, routines that normalize types of behavior. And so you need to provoke them in some way to see what they're capable of doing differently.
So there's something of a muscle memory in systems.
I think muscle memory is and a polite way to put it. Sometimes I think there's a defensiveness that's there. And often people will say that they want innovation, they want change, but then what they're talking about, is that at the individual level, is that at the customer level, or is that at the system level?
So when you're talking at the system level, what and you're doing this in the context of education, secondary, primary education, both in the UK and the US. What kind of system change are you talking about that may be masked in ritual?
Okay, so a really great example, because I think both in the US at the moment, it's Anti-Bullying Prevention Month, and in the UK in November, it will be Anti-Bullying Week. So both countries have education systems that perpetuate bullying in various ways. And so we could say, well, is that about the individual, and are some young people more likely to be targeted, or some adults in the workplace more likely to be targeted? That's focusing on the individual. The late Philip Zimbardo, who said, well, you have to look at situational forces. You have to look at situations which manifest bullying. So is that highly aggressive situations that are perpetuated? Or do you look at the system and say, how does the system perpetuate those situations that individuals find themselves in? And that's the bit that we need to provoke more.
So let's dig into that a bit. So it's an important distinction. You're focusing on the system side. How would a system provoke, or not provoke, but sort of mindlessly allow bullying to continue in an educational setting?
So the easiest way is just to blame the person being targeted. Well, you brought it on yourself. So you can say, well, actually suck it up, So that's, mindlessly allowing the situation to continue. An alternative is simply to say, well, we can exclude the group or individual who's doing the bullying, but not challenge their behavior in any way at all. So just simply by displacing them, we believe that leads to some kind of change in the dynamic, which you might do for a time, but it doesn't necessarily make individuals in that system feel any safer. Or we can say that we just don't train professionals in any meaningful way in how to actually address the issue. So like the combination of the three help perpetuate a particular type of behavior that can be really frustrating. And so I think if we take, from a kind of, I'm loath to put it this way, but from a kind of customer perspective, like who's the customer, the parent or the student? So if it's the student who's being serviced at that point, the system is not serving their needs by making them feel unsafe. It's the parent sending my child to that school, my needs aren't being serviced either because they're experiencing a harm within that system. And the danger is that the system itself becomes defensive, well, it's the child's fault, or it's the parent who's being difficult about this. And so we stop seeing the needs in the relationships between people. And that's what systems are very good at doing, dehumanizing sometimes.
So as you're describing this, a couple of images come to mind for me. One is a map of this environment. Another is almost the really more a metaphor of theater with actors and props and settings. Do, in your work, do you find that there is some sort of structure or framework like one of those that helps you start to not
Absolutely.
only make sense but do some specific activities, like you can start seeing where, literally seeing where to work a lever.
Absolutely. So I think I'm more organically than that. So I resist mechanistic metaphors on the whole. So I think in terms of mapping, so mapping is great because often you can map the social network of a
Hmm.
young person and actually help them identify who are those people who offer support, care, who are those people who are causing harm, and what's the overlink between them is really crucial. And just being able to visualize that map rather than holding it in your head sometimes is an incredibly powerful process. I remember years ago working with a girl who was being cyberbullied, and until we mapped out all of the people involved, I think there was something like 20, she recognized that some of them were bystanders, some of them were reluctant participants, but there was just two people in particular in her map that were really driving the harmful behavior. So suddenly, once we knew that, it changed the way in which she needed to engage with both the school and the people perpetrating the behavior. So and social maps are incredibly powerful to complex systems. And then I think your second point, which is about the power of metaphors, is absolutely fundamental. So if we say that if addressing bullying is like addressing an archipelago, you might see the things above the ocean that look very small, but underneath there's whole structures that support those types of behaviors that aren't often visible to leaders, to parents, etc., but absolutely need to be addressed. So metaphors within complex systems are a powerful way of both recognizing the system and giving a shorthand to the system as well.
So I'm assuming in these types of situations, the people that you begin the conversation with, who may even contact you, hire you, are administrators. Is that typical? Like, you're not being brought in by parents, let's say, or educators?
Very rarely, I have to say. I think there is a bit of a shift, and probably more so in the States, with the way in which parents can put demands on administrators for change, probably compared to the UK. But on the whole, you're absolutely right. It's either head teachers in the UK or school principals in the US. It took me ages to find that distinction. That are interested in saying, well, how do I change the system? Or at a higher level, how does a district leader or how does a leader of a multi-academy trust in the UK really make sure that the systems that influence the culture are in the right positions for the change they want?
So those people are, the ones who open the door one way or another, and I imagine that's a difficult door to get opened. It's for them, they have to really see and feel and be pressured to some degree to acknowledge and address a problem, even though this goes beyond maybe their day to day remit, the muscle memory of their participation in that system. But for them to then help you work with other actors in that system, let's say teachers, that seems like that is maybe as difficult as getting that door open in the first place.
I think as always, it depends. So with some leaders, they are absolutely clear that change needs to happen within education. And the constraints of the system are things that they will actively challenge and want to address.
Hmm.
For others, like you said, the pressure of a particular crisis moment drives them to say, like, what we've done in the past isn't going to work now and definitely not in the future. I think the challenge where we start to look at kind of working with teachers is, again, it's not a homogenous group, that it depends on how long you've been into the profession, what level of kind of information you have about the change, the challenge you want to address as well. So again, just using, like, take something slightly different, like trauma-informed practice has been something that has been present in both the UK and the US. The question is, how much do teachers know about the way in which trauma affects children's behavior?
Right.
How does that then translate into practice into the classroom to create experiences that recognize that becomes really important. And I think the bit from a systems perspective is training an individual is the fastest route to failure, because either the individual gets a new thing that they have to deal with, or that individual will leave eventually. So for leaders to take a more systemic view of things is about really saying, how do we make sure the things that we value most are sustained over time?
I'm so glad you brought that up. And time and sustainability, really two words that are kind of describing the same thing here. I want to come back to that point in a moment, but before we get to time, I'm curious. Do you find that you are ever able to work with not necessarily administrators in the beginning of a project, but with, let's say, in the States, a teachers union, or I don't know if there's an equivalent in the UK, but some professional body of practice for educators where you can rather, I mean, because, like, I know from experience, like, sometimes here in New York, the administrators and the teachers have something of a can be confrontational relationship. They don't necessarily have, like, some are unionized and some are not, and there's a lot of friction there, and it's often handled, at a departmental level, not at a school level. So, the relationship gets abstracted in effect, and so it's difficult for those people to work together. So I'm wondering if you reach educators through other paths, like professional organizations that bring you in.
Yeah, I think because they're all part of the education system. So to some extent, that defensiveness you're talking about, Lee, is really natural because it's a filter between what's rubbish and what's actually of value.
Mhm.
And so again, you have to work out how you negotiate and provoke sometimes to get your messages across. And sometimes it's very simple, like, here's the evidence base, makes perfect sense. At other points, it's much more, well, what does this mean for me and my cohort of colleagues at this moment in time? Does that feel like extra pressure? And that's part of the defensiveness of the system, in terms of the sense that everything is either a burden or everything is urgent, and helping people recognize that actually, if we change the perspective of time in the system, what is it that you're really trying to achieve over what time is an interesting conversation. So taking, like kids in New York, for example, I'm sure that there's issues around exclusion, disproportionality, etc. Well, do we want to solve that this month, this year, 5 years from now, 10 years from now? So what's the level of commitment of change we need to have over what time to really achieve the benefits that everyone in New York would like to see?
Yeah, so let's dig a little bit into more into that issue of time, and you're touching on it for sure in terms of getting things to stick. Um, this is always having been a consultant. I know, to come in for a short period of time and try to impact and affect change is really, you're pushing a pretty big boulder up a pretty steep hill. And one reason I got out of consulting, frankly, was I just felt like, well, they bring me in for a little while, and I can't make a change in a short amount of time, and the more I'm with them, the more familiar I become, less like a consultant and more like a team member, and then you start to bring in baggage, and it just become like the window of opportunity starts to close. And I remember just wondering, even long-term consulting relationships, I would just wonder, what am I doing here? know, it's nice to get paid, but I don't think I'm making an impact. And this is with for-profit organizations where they were pretty flush. If I was doing that for in an educational context, I know I would have had a real big problem with that, where there's not a lot of budget. So that's a long-winded way of not only asking you how you deal with, affecting change before that window closes, as well as a little therapy for me. So how do you? And that's a big question. I'm not sure you have the one answer, but how do you keep the window open for long enough for things to change before you move on?
Yeah, I think change from my own research is anything less than 3 years is not systems change. So I think there's a question in there, which is often consultants are brought in on short-term, quick wins, and systems are very good at being resilient to that. So yes, we can take your shiny new thing this month, this year, but oh look, there's another shiny new thing next year. And so that goes right back to the start of the conversation about the rituals that happen in the system. So one of the things that I've learned is that sometimes people can just wait you out. Like if they know you're not about for the long term, we just have to sit here until the money runs out, the leadership changes, the system has, maintained the status quo, if you like. So I think one of the challenges from a service design / consultancy perspective is, are we actually taking a systems lens to the change that we're seeking to address? And probably the answer is in many cases no, because we're given short-term outcomes which might achieve some kind of career benefit for people,
Hmm.
but don't change the system in any.
It's tough. Yeah, it's very difficult. And I was sort of hoping you might have the silver bullet. Just hoping. I kind of every time I bring this question up during a podcast, I'm always hoping my guest might have that silver bullet, but I know better. It's not. It's just, yeah, 3 years. I think that's a reasonable number, and it kind of messes with the economics of these types of projects, but it is fair and it is realistic, and you got to wonder when maybe a client doesn't see it that way if you're even working with the right people. Um, we're going to take a quick break, but just enjoying this conversation, Luke. We're talking with Luke Roberts, co-founder and COO of HighFive Consulting in London, author of Leading Schools and Sustaining Innovation, and panelist at Advancing Service Design 2024. We'll be right back. I'm going to give you 5 reasons you should be using the Rosenverse. First one, where else are you going to find 100 events that you can attend for free every year, 2 a week, about product management, product design, and UX design, plus a highly engaged Slack-based community of over 13,000 of your peers. What else are you going to find in the Rosenverse? You'll find hundreds and hundreds of recordings of conference presentations and community session recordings, all in one place from a single search browse interface. And behind those hundreds of recordings are hundreds of experts, people who have advanced the field, people who are your peers who are doing interesting new things, all in one place. Why else should you use the Rosenverse? We've been advancing the field of UX since 2005. You're going to find the most advanced content on such topics as design operations and program management, UX research, and a host of other topics from climate UX to civic design to how designers can work better in product organizations. Lastly, you've been trusting our content since we started back in 2005. Whether it's our books, our conferences, our community sessions, well, we think you're going to trust the way we've brought those all together so that you can spend less time searching and browsing and more time learning and benefiting. I hope you'll try out the Rosenverse, and I hope you'll consider upgrading to a gold paid membership because it brings you a lot more. Not only do you have access to hundreds and hundreds of recorded conference presentations, but you also get access to the Rosenbot, which is a ChatGPT 4 level chatbot that we've been training on all of our content, including our growing collection of nearly 60 books and counting. It's all there. It's all great content. And the Rosenbot is a cutting edge way to get at it. You can try the gold membership out with a trial for 2 weeks. Give it a try. Hope you like it. Welcome back to the Rosenfeld Review. Lou Rosenfeld talking with Luke Roberts about systems. And actually, Luke, I wanted to go back to something you said when we were introducing you in the beginning of the podcast about being a systems provocateur. That's fascinating. What does it mean to provoke a system?
I think, oh, that's a great question. I think it's about calling out some of the ways in which systems behave. So it's not about attacking people on a personal level. It's much more about saying, is the system that you're in doing what you expect it to do? And what are the hidden, the malign, the challenging parts of the system that everyone goes, that's not my fault, but it needs to be addressed. So if I can give an example, and this is probably relevant to both the UK and the US, when I was starting my work in the States, they often talked about the school to prison pipeline as a system. And I said, well, from a UK perspective, I've called it a school to prison production line, because there are things that service providers do which actually help perpetuate the journey for particularly young people towards prison. So short-term funding rounds are a really good example. Poorly thought out interventions, lack of long-term relationships are all things that are within the gift of service providers to do, but don't. And so sometimes you can provoke the system and it gets a bit defensively about these things. But at other points, people kind of sit back and go, you know what? That's the bit that we haven't really thought through enough.
Mm. So, which is, I'm sure, a difficult wire to walk on for you, right? I mean, like, have you had any experiences where, I mean, you try to point at the system and not the individual, but it's so difficult for the individual involved or the individuals that it becomes just, well, I don't know. I don't want you to recount a horror story or anything like that, but it just
Well,
seems like, go for it.
I'll give 2 examples. So I did say this once in a panel on London that, you know, with the rise in teenage murders, is this not an epic failure of all service providers? And the tumbleweed just rolled through the room on that
Mm,
one.
wow.
So I was like, okay. So like one of the things I'm learning is like you have to have empathy for the individual, but you can have frustration with the system, absolutely. But on the positive side, when I've done work within, for example, the healthcare service, there is a real acknowledgement that the system needs to change. And how do we address, as leaders in the UK healthcare system at least, how do we start to get out of a silo mindset, and how do we start to break down some of the barriers for the patient journey to really make a difference? So I think on that side, to some extent, some sectors are much more ready for provocation
Hmm.
than others, because there's a stronger or more prominent need that needs to be addressed right now.
This is amazing. And I got to say, as an aside, I don't know if you're familiar with the book, The Loneliness of the Long Distance Runner, uh,
Mhm.
which came out in 1959. I just started reading it last night, and it's all about the sort of, I think the hero is a 16-year-old, 17-year-old English kid who's already like been in and out of reform schools, and he's talking about his life and how he's going to continue in, in that kind of system and how ill-equipped it is to really make a difference for him. So this is just amazing for me from a personal perspective. um, one last question for you. I know you touch on this in your book, this issue of energy. And it's not something I hear a lot of people in the service design world talking about. But I wonder if you've hit on a certain framing that might unlock some new wisdom for us.
Okay, yeah, surely. So I think during my kind of research, I was asked to explain, if I'm so interested in systems, why there is absence of action. And it took me ages to figure it out. So in the end, I used the metaphor, going back to our earlier point. I used the metaphor of the flow of energies. So if a system is not doing something, so if it's not accepting or adopting the change you're seeking, it means energy in the system is going somewhere else
Hmm.
rather than to that change. And what I mean by energy, for people listening, is I was thinking about the flow of information and how information gets attention. So if you want your change to occur, what do people need to know? But then most importantly, how do you get their attention? So how do they remain focused and concentrated on that change long enough? So for me, it was kind of really interesting to apply that to education. And then just before the pandemic, being asked by people in the health sector to address that, but also having done work in prisons in the UK, how the flow of energy can be so easily curtailed by
Hmm.
other things as well. So it felt like it was an idea that was cross industries. That I was like, there's something in this that explains not just why things get done, but also why things don't get done at a systems level.
So there's blockers as well as essentially starters to that flow of
I think
energy.
I think you can be more bold than that, Lou. I think you can say there's blockers, there's parasites, and
Mm.
there's also kind of harvesters of energy as well. So what I mean by that, yes, some people just stop you doing what they think you don't want to do. Others will co-opt your energy, and so suddenly it'll be for this kind of project that gets someone promoted, and you're like, well, that's not what I was trying to achieve at all. And then I think there's just other people who kind of see what the enthusiasm and excitement you're generating, and they'll go, well, we need to chop that down because that goes against our culture.
Mm. Well, I like that you're using that framing of energy because I imagine when um, people who are trying to change systems or provoke systems start their work and maybe break through to the system, the people who manage or maintain that system probably say, well, in order to make things change, we need money. And money is a form of, I suppose, energy in this type of
Yep.
setting, but it's not the only one. And there's enthusiasm, and there's belief in change, and other types of forms of energy that I imagine can circulate in a system. So I love
Yeah,
that framing.
yeah, absolutely, Lou. And from a service design perspective, you can have a really great client who pays you all their money, but doesn't give you any attention.
Well, Luke, this has been fantastic. Really appreciate your sharing with our listeners today. Uh, before we wrap up, speaking of our listeners, did you bring them a gift?
I did. One of my favorite books, and I keep on going back to it time and time again, is by a philosopher called Bernard Suits, and it's called The Grasshopper Games, Life and Utopia. And he talks about, if you lived in utopia, what would you do all day? And his conclusion is you'd play games. And it sounds like very kind of trivial, but actually the deeper meaning is, like, what he's really saying is you do things because they have an intrinsic value to you to do and enjoy. So whatever game you're playing, whether that's like a collaborative game or building a house, can become a game. It's just this idea of how games can be translated into systems, and that really just the way he makes his argument is so beautiful. And I was like, wow, like, I wish I could write like that. But also, like, the deeper philosophy behind it feels very system orientated to me.
Lovely. I love that idea of play all day. And yeah, I think that's what I would do too. I'll have to check that book out, Luke. Luke, thanks for joining us. Everyone, if you're listening, we've heard from Luke Roberts, author of Leading Schools and Sustaining Innovation, COO and co founder of HighFive, based in London, does work with education systems here in the US as well as in the UK, and will be a panelist at Advancing Service Design 2024. One of the people who will be looking at the various proceedings of each day, the case studies especially that we're going to hear from and learn from, and look at them through various perspectives like the one that Luke just shared with us today. Thanks again for joining us, Luke.
Absolute pleasure.
Thanks for listening to the Rosenfeld Review, brought to you by Rosenfeld Media. If you like our show, please subscribe and review it on iTunes, Stitcher, or your favorite podcast platform. I'd love it if you tell a friend to have a listen, and check out our website for over 100 podcasts with other interesting people. You'll find them all at rosenfeldreview.com.